Okay, let's get into it. We are tackling a really profound set of documents today. We're doing an exhaustive analysis, but it's focused very intensely on just three powerful verses from the Quran.
Just three.
Specifically, Surah Al-An'am, verses 151 through 153. And, these three short verses, they're packed into one small section, but they seem to carry a staggering theological weight. Our sources are suggesting they're the cornerstone of an entire ethical system.
They absolutely are. For any listener who's, looking for a concise, authoritative shortcut to understanding the entire ethical and moral structure of the Islamic tradition, these three ayat, or verses,
right,
they're considered absolutely foundational.
Right.
Our sources consistently refer to them as the 10 Commandments of the Quran. They basically establish a universal ethical constitution handed down in the final revelation.
A universal constitution in just three verses. I mean, that's a massive claim.
It is.
So our mission today is to really extract why. Why do classical scholars hold this passage in such high regard? What are the specific, maybe surprising details they contain? What philosophical boundaries do they set? And I think most importantly, what do they mean for you, the modern learner, navigating the complexities of the 21st century? This is a serious deep dive into the very roots of morality.
And I think the initial insight that gives this passage its gravity is its theological stature. Our sources highlight this concept of al-wasiyah.
Al-wasiyah, what does that translate to?
It translates as the will, or the testament. And that framing, it suggests that these instructions are not just, general guidance. They are a specific, final, and binding legacy.
I found the history around that concept just incredibly powerful. The companion Abdullah ibn Masud, this is a primary scholar of the Quran, explicitly endorsed by the Prophet himself. He gave this passage immense status.
He really did.
He said, and I'm paraphrasing here, that anyone who wishes to read the will and testament of the Messenger of Allah on which he placed his seal, let him read these verses.
And that framing, a sealed final instruction, that's what elevates it. It goes beyond simple guidance into a binding legacy for the entire community that was to follow. It signals finality and absolute non-negotiable importance.
So why do the scholars categorize them as the essential framework? What makes them so special?
It's because they constitute what scholars refer to as the muqamat. These are the verses of established foundational meaning, the unambiguous truths. One of the greatest companions, Ibn Abbas, he even called these three verses the mother of the book.
The mother of the book?
Yeah, which reflects this idea that they contain the genetic code for a timeless, universal ethical code, one that is applicable across all human cultures, all generations. These are not temporary laws. They're foundational principles that never change.
Okay, so before we dive into the verses themselves, we have to set the stage. The context here seems critical.
To truly appreciate the power of these commands, you have to look at the unique literary and theological context of Surah Al-An'am, the chapter they appear in. This chapter, the sixth in the Quran, it's extraordinary. It was revealed in Makkah, which was a time when the early Muslims were engaged in this intense ideological struggle against polytheism.
And the tradition holds that its revelation was itself just a massive event, right?
Yes. Tradition states that this entire surah was revealed in a single instance, and significantly, it was accompanied by 70,000 angels.
70,000.
Now, obviously, we can't verify the precise number, but the story itself communicates the sheer monumental importance of the content.
70,000 angels for one chapter. That instantly tells you this is not secondary material. This is core. But why is the surah itself so important? What was it building up to?
It's known as the Surah of Aqidah.
The Surah of Creed.
The Surah of Creed, or core belief exactly. The first 150 verses are spent systematically dismantling the logic of polytheism. They establish the absolute, unchallenged sovereignty of God over the entire cosmos, detailing the proofs of monotheism. The whole chapter constructs the believer's entire worldview piece by piece.
Okay, so the groundwork is purely theological, it's philosophical, for 150 verses. Then what happens?
And this is the crucial link. The placement of these three verses, these 10 ethical commands, at the very end of this long intellectual argument is everything. The message is logical, it's unavoidable. It's basically saying, because we have just established through compelling rational and spiritual arguments that there is only one creator, one sustainer, one sovereign.
Then these must be the practical ethical laws that naturally flow from that belief.
That's it, exactly. The commands are not arbitrary. They are the necessary application of acknowledging a singular divine sovereign. These are the only laws that matter, because only the supreme owner, the Rab, has the right to legislate.
That is the ultimate conclusion, then. The practical output of the creed. Okay, now we have to address the inevitable comparison. When we say 10 commandments, people's minds instantly go to the Decalogue given to Prophet Moses, in Exodus 20.
Of course.
Our source material makes it clear that the Quranic presentation, while it acknowledges that prophetic lineage, it offers distinct and very important nuances.
It does, and we should get right into those.
Let's do that. For you, the listener, who is looking for that aha moment, what did the Quran retain, and what did it shift or enhance to reflect the finality of the message?
I'd say the most immediate shift is the integration of the vertical and horizontal axes.
What do you mean by that?
The Quranic version immediately integrates the prohibition of shirk, that's associating partners with God directly with social ethics. The right of the Creator and the rights of creation, they're presented as inseparable from the very first word.
That's a powerful statement about faith right there. You can't have sound theology without sound ethics, and you can't have sound ethics without sound theology.
They're two sides of the same coin.
What about the specific, maybe more ritualistic elements?
The most notable removal is the Sabbath. The Sabbath was an ordinance that was highly specific to the Israelites, to the Jewish people. It served as a commemoration of their liberation from Egypt, a specific covenant. Islam abrogated this ritualistic specific day.
And what was it replaced with?
It was replaced by the constant ongoing emphasis on adhering to the singular straight path.
That is a profound exchange. You're trading a specific, time-bound, weekly ritual for a timeless, always-on ethical methodology. It suggests that the pursuit of piety and adherence to the law is meant to be constant, governing all 7 days of the week.
Exactly. The focus shifts from ritual time to constant behavior.
Okay, what about the rights related to family, particularly parents?
The nuance here is critical. While the biblical Decalogue commands one to honor father and mother, the Quran elevates this to ihsan. Ihsan. It's a concept that means active benevolence, excellence, and profound goodness in treatment. It's a much higher and more access standard than mere honor or obedience. It demands that you treat them with beauty and perfection, often anticipating their needs before they even ask.
We see that immediate move from a general law, like honor, to a profound ethical depth, which is excellence. And on the prohibition of killing, the formulation seems more precise, more legalistic.
It is. The Quranic command, do not kill the soul except by right, is significant because it includes the legal right exception right there, within the core command itself. It's not an afterthought. It establishes the rule of law immediately. Life is absolutely sacred, but the text itself acknowledges that the state, through a legitimate judicial process, retains the right to apply specific, narrowly defined capital measures to uphold justice and prevent widespread chaos.
Wait, okay, if the entire passage is a universal ethical constitution meant to be perfect, isn't adding that legal right exception a massive risk? I mean, doesn't history show that legal right can be easily abused by the state, or tyrants just define their own right?
And that is precisely why the context of the Muqamat is so essential, and why the specific legal criteria are so narrowly defined by the supplementary traditions. The command establishes the principle of legitimate judicial authority.
Okay.
But the tradition immediately limits that authority to upholding the sanctity of life, family, and state security. It does this through three specific criteria: retribution for murder, which is qisas, protecting the family structure from adultery by a married person, and protecting the state from treason or armed rebellion. It codifies the rule of law while tightly restricting its application.
So that provides the necessary context to prevent vigilantism and state overreach, provided those strict limits are actually followed.
Precisely. And finally, on prohibitions against immorality, the Quran shifts from prohibiting the act to prohibiting the approach.
What does that mean?
Well, instead of simply saying, do not commit adultery, the Quran uses the phrase, do not approach immoralities, fawahish. This is a powerful, proactive, preventative measure. It forbids the very steps, the environment, and the desires that lead to the sin. It broadens the scope to both internal and external integrity.
This context clearly establishes that we are looking at a universal constitution, a final, comprehensive ethical framework that spiritualizes every single aspect of public and private life. Okay, let's begin our deep dive into the verses themselves, starting with the foundation, the vertical relationship in verse 6.151. Verse 151 begins with that foundational relationship, the rights of the Creator. Let's start with the first command, the prohibition of associating anything with God or shirk. The verse starts with this really powerful direct address. Say, come, I will recite what your Lord has prohibited to you. He commands that you not associate anything with him.
That opening is just loaded with authority. The imperative, qual, say, commands the prophet to convey the message, establishing that these are direct, non-negotiable divine decrees. But what's equally vital is the use of the word Rab, sustainer, cherisher, owner, instead of the general name Allah.
Why does focusing on Rab matter so much for the law? Why that specific word?
Because Rab implies the one who nurtures you, provides for you, and maintains your very existence moment by moment. The theological depth here is that the one who continuously provides for you, who sustains you, is the only one who has the exclusive right to legislate for you. It ties the right to legislate directly to the continuous act of sustaining creation. You obey the one who feeds you.
That brings us to the command itself. Allah tushriku bihi shay'an, do not associate anything with him. Our source material really emphasizes the absolute negation that's built into the language here.
Yes, the use of the indefinite word shay'an, which means anything, in a negative command creates a total and comprehensive prohibition. It's an absolute negation. It doesn't just prohibit associating physical idols, which was, the obvious issue in Makkah at the time.
So if it's not just about physical idols, what else does this prohibition cover in terms of modern life? Where do we see this today?
Well, it covers every conceivable entity or concept that you might give your ultimate loyalty, your ultimate fear, or your ultimate hope to. It could be political ideologies, specific charismatic leaders, celebrities, or even the relentless pursuit of your own ego. If you fragment your core devotion or allow any created thing to displace the Creator in your heart, you have violated this command.
To help believers identify the subtle ways this creeps in, classical theologians developed a structure, right, to sort of categorize shirk.
Yes, figures like Ibn Taymiyyah and Ibn al-Qayyim categorize shirk into 3 fundamental dimensions. It's a really helpful framework.
Okay, so let's unpack those dimensions in clear language as if we're explaining them to someone who has never heard these terms before.
Absolutely. The first dimension addresses God's lordship, his role as creator and sustainer. So shirk in lordship is the belief that others share in God's ability to create, sustain, or manage the universe.
In plain English.
In plain English, this is relying on independent causes. It's believing a lucky charm, an astrological sign, or even a specific business process independently guarantees your success or protection, ignoring the one who allows that cause to function in the first place.
So if I put my absolute faith in my meticulously planned 401k, and I treat my bank balance as the ultimate source of my stability and peace of mind, am I running into this kind of shirk?
That's a perfect modern manifestation. If the fear of losing your bank balance outweighs your fear of disappointing the divine, then that balance has become a kind of idol for you.
Wow, okay, what's the second dimension?
The second dimension is shirk in worship. This is more straightforward. It's directing acts of devotion, prayer, ultimate submission, sacrifice, or expressing absolute love and fear to anyone other than God. This covers all visible idolatry, but also the more subtle act of giving perfect obedience to a human authority when it contradicts divine law.
And the third category, this one seems the most abstract. Association in names and attributes.
This dimension addresses how we conceive of the divine. It's either likening God's attributes to creation, that's anthropomorphism, thinking God is limited like us, or, conversely, denying his attributes altogether. The point is to maintain the absolute radical uniqueness of the divine being.
So the goal is total spiritual clarity.
Mm-hmm.
The source material emphasizes the profound societal implication of this, particularly Sayyid Qutb's argument about liberation.
Yes, Sayyid Qutb argues that this commandment is the single greatest declaration of human liberation in history. Think about it. If a human bows only to God, they're instantly liberated from the tyranny of every other created thing.
They're no longer enslaved.
Exactly. No longer enslaved to oppressive kings, manipulative priests, or the brutal, fleeting slavery of societal trends and consumerism.
That makes perfect sense. If you fragment your loyalties among multiple competing powers, a boss, a political party, a celebrity trend, your own ego, your psyche is constantly pulled in warring directions. You can't have psychological stability, that's Sakina, if you're trying to please 10 different masters.
And that stability is the spiritual prerequisite for all healthy ethical action. The challenge for the modern learner is identifying the hidden shirk. The prophet himself warned it is more hidden than the creeping of a black ant on a black stone in the darkness of night.
So what are the primary hiding places for that subtle shirk today? Where should you look?
Well, beyond the materialism we just talked about, a big one is Riyah. That's showing off or performing good deeds primarily to gain human praise rather than divine acceptance. This turns virtue into a kind of performance art. It also includes an excessive reliance on material means, the asbab, while forgetting the causer of causes, the musabib al-asbab. The command forces us to constantly check our deepest intentions. Who am I really trying to impress? Who holds the ultimate power over my life?
Once that vertical axis, the man-God relationship, is fixed and purified, the Quran immediately moves to the horizontal axis. Man-man. It starts with the rights of the parents. This is commandment 2. And to parents, good treatment. Ahsan.
The juxtaposition is critical. Immediately after establishing the rights of the Creator, you get the rights of creation, starting with those who were the immediate means of one's existence. Scholars explain the theological connection. God is the ultimate cause, parents are the proximate, the immediate cause. Therefore, gratitude to the ultimate cause is incomplete without gratitude to the means.
But why use that word, ihsan? As we noted earlier, honor would have been sufficient. Why elevate it to excellence?
Because ihsan means excellence, beauty, and doing something as if God sees you, even if you don't see him. The Arabic structure used here makes this a permanent state of being, not just a single action. Obedience, ta, is just doing what you are told. Isa is anticipating their needs, serving with profound joy rather than a sense of duty, and encompassing them with mercy and deep respect.
The sources define this with such great specificity. I was struck by the mention of avoiding even the slightest sign of frustration, the word oof.
That is the highest standard of conduct. Scholars like Al-Saadi describe ihsan as maintaining soft words and kind actions, and absolutely avoiding any speech that might cause them grief. And that includes that sigh, that roll of the eyes, or that muttered word, oof, when you're asked to do something inconvenient.
That seems impossibly difficult, especially in a modern context where we are all busy, stressed, and perhaps caring for elderly parents who might be demanding or frail. How does one even apply the oof prohibition in a busy, demanding life?
It becomes a profound exercise in psychological management. It's about prioritizing a long-term spiritual reward over short-term irritation. It means realizing that the obligation is not merely physical service, but maintaining a cheerful countenance and a patient attitude while you're serving. The moment that inner irritation breaks the surface into speech or visible frustration, you have violated the standard of ihsan. It demands that you treat the parent's dignity as utterly inviolable, regardless of their condition.
So this is why the tradition reinforces the family unit as the absolute cornerstone of society.
Absolutely. By cementing this bond through ihsan, Islam ensures social continuity and intergenerational equity. In an aging society where elderly care is often institutionalized or outsourced, this commandment imposes a personal, non-transferable duty on the children. It teaches responsibility.
And there's that powerful hadith that links this domestic duty to the highest spiritual aspiration.
Yes. The Prophet equated dedicated kindness to parents with jihad, with struggle in the way of Allah. When a man asked to join a military expedition, the Prophet asked him, "Are your parents alive?" The man said yes. The Prophet said, "Then exert yourself in their service." It teaches us that spiritual elevation is often achieved not through grand, public, heroic acts, but through quiet, consistent, and often emotionally difficult service within one's own home. It requires immense patience and sacrifice.
Commandment 3 addresses a deeply historical and, sadly, still relevant issue, infanticide. The command is, "And do not kill your children out of poverty. We will provide for you and them."
This was a direct assault on the practice of Jahiliyyah, the pre-Islamic era of ignorance, where economic anxiety was a primary driver for killing children for imlaq.
And this is where the linguistic precision of the Quran provides a profound aha moment for the reader, the subtle difference between this verse and a similar one later in the scripture in Surah Al-Isra.
This distinction is a remarkable piece of psychological analysis. In this verse, 6.151, the command is, "Do not kill your children, min imlaq." That means out of poverty that is already present. The parents are currently struggling financially.
We're in the thick of it.
They're in the thick of it. Therefore, God comforts the parents first. He says, "We will provide for you and them." The reassurance addresses the parents' immediate, pressing anxiety about their own survival first, because that is their most acute fear.
So what happens in the parallel verse? How does it change?
In Surah 17, verse 31, the command is slightly different. Do not kill your children, khashyat imlaq. This means for fear of future poverty. In this scenario, the parents are currently okay, but they fear that a new arrival will deplete their assets down the road.
So it's an anxiety about what might happen.
Exactly. And here, God says, "We provide for them and for you." The reassurance prioritizes the child's provision first, dismissing the future fear that the new arrival will be a burden.
That subtle shift in the order of provision shows a profound sensitivity to the precise psychological fear of the listener. It's tailoring the divine comfort to the exact human anxiety.
It is the core theological challenge to the Malthusian scarcity mindset. This commandment establishes the doctrine of risk, or provision, the idea that the ultimate economic source is not finite human resources, but infinite divine provision. A child's presence is seen as a cause for the expansion of provision, not its contraction.
So it's a deep life lesson in trust, in tawakkul. It's teaching that economic anxiety should never, ever be allowed to override moral sanctity.
And this is why modern ethicists extend this prohibition to issues like abortion when it's driven solely by economic fears. They stress that life and provision are not linked to human fears, but to divine decree.
And what about this concept of spiritual infanticide? That's a powerful term.
This is the modern ethical extension. Killing a child is not limited to the physical body. It includes willfully depriving a child of comprehensive moral and religious education, of tarbiyah, leaving them spiritually bankrupt, or destroying their innocence through radical neglect. The command calls for a holistic parenting that recognizes the child's eternal life, their akhirah, as being equally important as their worldly life.
Moving to the fourth command, we get to the prohibition of sexual and moral transgression. And do not approach immoralities, what is apparent of them and what is concealed.
The term here is al-fawahish. It refers to sins that are excessive in their ugliness and obscenity. It's specifically understood to cover sexual transgressions like adultery, fornication, and just general public lewdness.
And again, the language is stronger than simply prohibiting the act itself. It says, "Lataqrabu," do not approach. Why the emphasis on the approach?
That is the core philosophy of prevention. In Islamic law, it's called sad al-darai, or blocking the means. Islam recognizes that human willpower is finite, especially when you're faced with temptation. It is far easier to avoid the initial step than it is to stop once the desire is aroused and the environment is conducive to sin.
So the prohibition extends to all the preparatory steps. It's the ethical equivalent of not keeping junk food in the house if you're on a diet. You manage your environment so your willpower doesn't have to work so hard.
Precisely. This prohibits lustful gazing, private isolation with non-related members of the opposite sex, that's kalwa, and the relentless consumption of inappropriate media that normalize transgression. The life lesson here for you is practical. Proactively manage your environment and your digital consumption to eliminate those triggers.
The command also makes this distinction between what is apparent and what is concealed. That duality is fascinating.
The distinction is vital for integrity. The apparent vices, public indecency, open promiscuity, they destroy the social fabric. They normalize sin and desensitize the public conscience.
So that's a protection for the community. And the concealed vices.
The concealed vices, hidden lusts, secret affairs, or sins of the heart like envy and hypocrisy, they test your true personal integrity. The lesson is that taqwa, true God consciousness, means being the same person in the dark when no one is watching as you are in the light. If you only avoid sin because you're worried about your social reputation, your moral structure is fundamentally weak.
The final command in this first verse is the absolute sanctity of life. And do not kill the soul which Allah has forbidden to be killed except by legal right.
This reaffirms the absolute inviolability of the human soul, the nafs. And the soul which Allah has forbidden is a broad, inclusive category. It covers not just fellow believers, but also non-Muslims living under Islamic rule, the dhimmis, and non-Muslims who have treaties of peace, the muwahhids.
The sources make the Prophet's warning about violating that sanctity extremely clear, don't they?
Yes, the warning is stark. Whoever kills a muwahhid shall not smell the fragrance of paradise. That inclusion demonstrates the universal respect for life and the binding nature of treaties built right into the law. It rejects any form of indiscriminate violence.
We discussed the crucial expression, illa bil haq, except by right. Let's just reiterate why that is not a blank check for capital punishment.
Because the authentic traditions immediately limit and define that right. The narration from the companion Ibn Masud restricts this right to 3 extremely specific cases where the state may take a life. First, adultery by a married person, which threatens the family structure and lineage. Second, murder as a form of retribution or kisas. And third, apostasy coupled with active treason or armed aggression against the community.
So it's narrowly defined to protect the core institutions, family, life, and the state's security.
And this leads to the most important legal point, the total rejection of vigilantism. The execution of this right is the sole prerogative of the recognized judiciary, the qada, and the legitimate state leader, the imam. This foundation rejects tribal vendettas or mob justice, establishing a civil society governed strictly by the rule of law to prevent chaos or facade.
So verse 151 established the vertical relationship with God, the tawhid, and the immediate horizontal protections required to sustain a society: family bonds, sanctity of life, moral boundaries. Now we move into verse 152, which seems to deepen the focus on economic and social justice. It shows that these sacred commands apply directly to the marketplace and the balance sheet.
Yes, verse 152 is heavily focused on practical social integrity, especially protecting economic rights and ensuring justice in everyday transactions. This is where faith translates directly into marketplace behavior and social policy, and it starts with the most vulnerable.
Commandment 6 is, "And do not approach the orphan's property except in a way that is best until he reaches maturity."
The yatim, the orphan, having lost their father, the traditional provider, is perhaps the most financially vulnerable member of society. And the command is not merely, do not steal. It says, do not approach it, unless the interaction is ila bilati hiya asan, in a way that is best.
That phrasing suggests a duty that goes way beyond passive protection. It sounds like it demands optimization.
Exactly. Guardians have a profound fiduciary duty. They are encouraged by scholars to proactively manage and invest the orphan's wealth, perhaps in trade or business, so that it grows, and isn't simply consumed by years of inflation or by the mandatory zakat, the charity tax. The guardian must manage the assets with a higher duty of care than they manage their own.
So if the guardian just lets the money sit in a vault for 10 years and it loses value to inflation, that could be seen as a violation of the spirit of ila bilati hiya asan.
It absolutely could be. It shows a neglect of stewardship. The stewardship, however, is not indefinite. It ceases when the orphan reaches ashudahu.
What defines that maturity? It can't just be physical age, right?
It's more complex than that. Ashudahu means full strength or maturity. Scholars agree it includes physical puberty, bulu, but crucially, it also requires mental maturity, or rushed.
And what's rushed?
Rushed means the ability to discern financial interests, to manage money wisely, and to avoid wastefulness. And this implies the guardian has a critical, often overlooked duty, providing financial literacy, education, and moral guidance. So the orphan is actually prepared to inherit and manage their rights successfully in the modern world. It's a duty of education, not just safekeeping.
Commandment 7 moves us straight into commercial integrity, which is incredibly relevant today. And give full measure and weight in justice. We do not charge any soul except according to its capacity.
This is all about systemic economic integrity. Al-Kail measure and Al-Mizan weight cover all commercial exchange. To defraud here is a form of theft that completely destroys social trust, and it's condemned extremely harshly. The Quran has an entire chapter, Surah Al-Mutaffifin, the defrauders, dedicated to those who take their full due but shortchange others.
We tend to think of this as a historical sin of, grain merchants in a bazaar. But the source material suggests commentators extend this far beyond just measuring grain. It becomes an extended metaphor for fair dealings in all transactions.
That extension is vital for you, the modern learner, to grasp. Commentators like Al-Razi extend this command to all interpersonal dealings where a promise or a transaction takes place. Giving full measure means giving people their due rights in all aspects of life. Giving respect, giving sufficient time to a task, giving fair pay for labor, and delivering the quality you promised.
Can you give some concrete modern examples of shortchanging the measure in that metaphorical sense?
Sure. Think about the service economy. If you are hired to do a job for 40 hours and you spend 10 of those hours on personal affairs or actively avoiding work, you are shortchanging the measure. Conversely, if a boss hires an employee for 40 hours and forces them to work 60 without additional pay or respect, the boss is shortchanging the measure. The violation exists whenever one party takes more than their due or gives less than they promised in the transaction.
What about in the digital age? What is the measure we are shortchanging now?
The measure in the digital age is often transparency and attention. Shortchanging the measure includes creating intentionally confusing digital contracts, using dark patterns to trick users into giving up their data, or manipulating metrics of value like views or clicks to deceive advertisers. Giving full measure in a digital service economy means being transparent about what is being exchanged and delivering exactly what was promised, even when the metrics are intentionally obscured.
The final part of this command, though, offers this immense divine compassion, immediately following a command for absolute precision. It says, we do not charge any soul except according to its capacity. What purpose does that serve?
It provides realistic idealism. Allah knows that absolute microscopic precision is often impossible for human beings. We are flawed, we make minor errors in measurement or calculation. This phrase comforts the believer, acknowledging that if one strives their utmost bilquist, with absolute equity to be exact, then unintentional minor errors are forgiven. You aim for perfection, but you're not crushed by anxiety over inevitable human imperfection.
Commandment 8 is fundamental to any functioning society, legal or political. And when you speak, be just, even if concerning a near relative.
This is a declaration that truth and justice, adil, must trump the most powerful social instinct we have: kinship, nepotism, or tribalism. It forces the believer to prioritize objective truth over blood ties. In many traditional tribal societies, loyalty to one's own is often the highest virtue. The Quran explicitly commands that justice must be elevated above these affiliations. You must be objective, even if the truth harms a beloved family member or benefits an acknowledged enemy.
That requires immense emotional courage. You're demanding that people resist the natural, powerful urge to protect their own tribe or their family's reputation.
It demands the ultimate integrity. The phrase wa idha qultum, and when you speak, covers all forms of utterance where judgment is involved. This includes judicial testimony, giving an honest job reference, mediating a conflict between two friends, or even political discourse. It requires us to speak with fairness, even when we're discussing a political opponent we can't stand.
The sources stress that this is the primary antidote to corruption.
Absolutely. A society where truth is contingent on relationships, where who you know determines what you say, is a society in irreversible decline. This command demands integrity and objectivity in all public and private discourse. It recognizes that injustice in speech is often the first domino to fall in a societal collapse.
Finally, in verse 152, we have the command to fulfill obligations and fulfill the covenant of Allah.
This command on fulfilling the Ad-Allah, the covenant of Allah, is critical because it binds all the previous commands, both those to God and those to man, into a single web of obligation, and this covenant is multidimensional.
Okay, let's break down those dimensions of the covenant.
First, there's the primordial covenant, the mithaq. This is the initial oath taken from the souls of Adam's descendants to recognize God as Lord. It's the original contract between Creator and creation. Second, there's the Sharia. The general acceptance of Islam itself is a contract to obey its laws, which includes all the commands we've just been talking about.
And the third dimension relates to specific, everyday promises and contracts we make.
Correct. It covers all specific oaths, vows, business agreements, international treaties, and the solemn marriage contract. The source material stresses that fulfilling contracts is not just a civil duty, but religious obligation. The Prophet warned that breaking a promise is a sign of nifaq, of hypocrisy.
This effectively spiritualizes the secular world of business and law. A violation of a business contract is not just a breach of civil law, it's a sin against the divine command.
It creates a cohesive, high-trust society where commercial integrity is paramount. If your honor and your reliability in commercial or relational dealings is tied directly to your ultimate belief system, you have the strongest possible safeguard against deceit and corruption. This is essential for trade, for diplomacy, for everything.
That wraps up the commands focused on social and economic transactions. We've covered everything from orphans' property to business honesty and judicial truth. Now, verse 153 provides the overarching methodology, the single unifying command that ties all 9 previous commands together. It tells us how to implement everything we've just heard. Commandment 10 is the methodological blueprint for the entire ethical structure. And moreover, this is my path, which is straight, so follow it. And do not follow other ways, for you will be separated from his way.
This is the critical steering mechanism. It tells the believer how to keep the ship straight. The entire architecture of the previous 9 commands, the social structure, the ethical purity, the economic integrity, is maintained by diligently staying on this single path.
The striking visual contrast is what makes this verse so memorable. The singular path versus the plural ways.
Yes. The path attributed to God is singular, sirat. This is the Sirat al-Mustaqim, the straight path, and it's straight, meaning it's the shortest distance between man and God, free of crookedness or unnecessary complication. The singular nature of the path reflects the singular, unified nature of the truth.
The warning then shifts to the plural ways, or subul.
The plural subul represents a multitude of deviations. This could be innovations, bidet, deviant sects that twist the fundamentals, alien ideologies that compete with revelation, and the whims, the hawa of the self that lead one astray. Any path that deviates from the core revelation of the Quran and the Sunnah is considered one of these dangerous side paths.
This isn't just abstract philosophy, though. The Prophet provided a vivid, unforgettable graphic illustration to really cement this idea.
He did. This is a memorable detail that every listener should hold on to. The Prophet drew a straight line in the sand and said, "This is the path of Allah." Then he drew a number of short lines radiating to the right and left of that straight line and said, "These are separate paths, and on every path there is a devil calling to it."
That image is stunningly effective. It emphasizes that misguidance isn't passive, it's an active, aggressive force, with devils, or ideologues, constantly recruiting people to deviate onto those side paths, promising easy answers or novel interpretations.
It shows that maintaining unity and staying pure requires constant deliberate focus and resistance, and the explicit warning is critical. Following those other paths, tafarruqa become, it separates you or scatters you.
So disunity, sectarianism, constantly chasing the next ideological trend. These aren't just social or political failings, they are theological deviations.
Precisely. Following other ways fractures the community, the Ummah, by fragmenting belief and practice. The life lesson here is intellectual focus and discipline. In an age of information overload and competing philosophies, the believer is told they don't need to sample every new idea. The path is already clear, singular, and divine, and the primary duty is adherence to its fundamentals, avoiding the path of confusion and disunity.
This final command acts as the spiritual and methodological constraint, ensuring that the application of all the preceding 9 commandments remains unified, centered, and protected from internal fracturing or external ideologies.
Now that we have covered all 10 commands, the foundation, the social code, and the methodology, we can look back and synthesize the material. We can analyze the structural progression of the verses, which offers this powerful map of the believer's moral development.
This structural journey, which is hinted at in the concluding phrase of each verse, is arguably one of the most brilliant parts of the entire passage. Let's trace that progression, starting with verse 151.
Okay, so verse 151, which deals with shirk, killing, and immorality, it ends with the phrase, tekalun. That means that you may use your reason. The commands in this verse are fundamentally intelligible to the sound intellect, the akal. Any irrational human mind, regardless of background, recognizes that idolatry, murder, and widespread promiscuity are fundamentally destructive to society and to the self. Islam appeals to this universal rationality first. It establishes a common basis for morality.
So stage 1 is the rational understanding of basic prohibitions. The verse 152, which is focused on these more complex social and economic duties, ends with the phrase tatakurun, that you may remember.
The positive commands here, upholding justice, caring for the orphan, fulfilling covenants, these are inherently difficult. They require sustained effort. Why? Because humans are prone to forgetfulness, self-interest, and greed. Pure rationality often fails when it's pitted against immediate financial or emotional gain. Therefore, these duties require constant reminder, Dicker, often through the reminder of the afterlife and divine accountability. You need more than just reason. You need divine motivation.
So moral application requires remembering the spiritual consequences. And finally, verse 153, the command to follow the straight path, ends with taqwa, that you may achieve piety.
Taqwa, God consciousness, is the culmination and the reward. It is the shield that protects the believer from slipping onto that myriad of deviant paths, the subul. The structural progression shows that moral development moves logically, from initial rational understanding, reason, to consistent application, remembrance of duty, and finally to a state of sustained ethical awareness, piety, which results from integrating the first 2 stages into habitual action. It's a complete manual for moral cognition.
That structural journey is a deep life lesson in itself. Let's pull out the most important applicable lessons for the contemporary world, starting with prioritization.
The clear hierarchy established here is vital for modern life, which often feels chaotic precisely because we prioritize money or reputation over core values. The central axis is tawhid. If the relationship with the Creator is fixed, if Commandment 1 is adhered to, all other relationships with family, society, the economy, they naturally align. Trying to fix complex social or economic problems without fixing the core theological and ethical foundation is like trying to put out a fire by treating the smoke instead of the source.
The concept of holistic ethics is also incredibly powerful here. It completely rejects the modern notion of a religious versus a secular divide.
There is absolutely none. Economic fraud, like shortchanging weights and measures, is just as much a violation of God's law as idolatry. This means that a person cannot claim spiritual piety, meticulously performing rituals, while simultaneously being a corrupt merchant, an abusive parent, or an unjust speaker. Integrity must be whole. It must govern the entire sphere of one's life, from the bedroom to the boardroom.
And the sanctity of the vulnerable stands out as a core civilizational mandate.
Indeed. A civilization's worth, according to this ethical constitution, is judged by how it treats its weakest members: the orphan, the child, and those reliant on treaties for their security. The Quran mandates a social welfare system built not on distant bureaucracy, but on individual accountability and high fiduciary care for those who cannot fend for themselves.
And finally, the intellectual focus offered by the straight path.
In our age of overwhelming information, competing news cycles, and contradictory philosophies, the straight path offers clear, decisive focus. The believer doesn't have to reinvent morality every decade or sample every new philosophy that appears on the horizon. The path is singular, clear, and divinely guided. This provides intellectual peace and protects the community from fragmentation and ideological warfare.
What we have unpacked today are not just 3 historical verses. They are a final, binding legacy, a comprehensive moral, legal, and theological constitution that the companion Ibn Masud called the sealed will.
This deep dive really shows that the goal of internalizing these commands is to move beyond mere ritualism. The goal is to reach the state of Taqwa, God consciousness, where these principles govern not just your belief, but every single transaction and interaction, large or small.
This text is a manual for psychological integration and for societal cohesion, showing that fixing the soul and fixing the economy are really just 2 sides of the same coin.
It is the ultimate holistic instruction.
So, as you reflect on this universal ethical constitution, I want to leave you with a final provocative thought, tying one of these ancient commands to our ultra-modern existence. We discuss Commandment 7, justice in weights and measures, and how it applies to integrity in commerce. If shortchanging a customer in grain or wood is fraud, what are the modern forms of shortchanging the measure in the economy of attention? When digital platforms optimize their algorithms to harvest your maximum time and attention for profit, often at the expense of your mental health, is that not a form of shortchanging the measure of human dignity and time? What does giving full measure look like now when we consider the value of our focus, our data, and our emotional energy? Think about that until our next deep dive.